Hello, I have installed Devuan Live for an Acer Aspire One 522, and it is an AMD dual-core processor with 1 gigahertz per core, C-50, and it is going to be a live into RAM load here, so that it runs on the runs from RAM. So now it's transferring the data onto the RAM. It's running at around 30 megabytes a second, or 240 megabit, and that's on a 8 gigabyte secure digital disk. It's being loaded on a USB adapter. It could probably transfer faster, but it is only a USB 2.0 port, so but it is loading a 1.4 gigabyte image onto a little under 4 gigabytes of RAM. So fortunately it has several pre-installed programs without needing a whole lot of loading new software from the internet. And it takes a little while to load. Some of these errors, of course, can be ignored. But last time I tested it, it was around 4 minutes or so to load into the operating, or maybe a little less. And Devuan is known for being a Debian distro that's forked from Debian around 10 years ago or so, just because it was a systemd issue that was somewhat of a pretty big fork for some people. So I've noticed the performance is actually pretty decent without systemd, especially on a dual-core processor like this, but I could be wrong. I think it's a lot more lightweight for a lot of older distros, and I mean there could be other reasons why you might not want to use it, but it does have touchpad support, Wi-Fi built in, so it's got quite a bit of remarkable driver support here. So it recognizes Wi-Fi. This has a built-in Ethernet, but I'm not using it. And yep, I'm just loading the browser now. I counted around 3.6 gigabytes in use yesterday, even with just one web page open, the New York Times, but it was running a little more than usual. I think it was only running at like 2.8 gigabytes or 2.7 with a browser page window open. And without anything running, it'll be at about 2.2 gigabytes. So this is the first time it's loading, and it's a little slower than I had it on suspend almost overnight, or most of the night, so it wasn't actually running this sluggish at the time, but it is probably still loading some of the drivers since it was a cold boot. But right now it's actually at 2 gigabytes, which is lower. And I forgot to load the touchpad, which is actually why it wasn't loading the Firefox. So on this one, all you have to do is just use the actual physical left click touchpad button, not the actually touch, and that was the only thing that was preventing it from loading the touch. So now that I actually am using it, I can actually just tap on one click, one tap, and it'll load Firefox. So at 2 gigabytes, that'll only increase 300 megabytes, and that's at, once it loads, it's going to be around 2.3. And again, it does seem to be loading a little bit slower than usual, but that's just because it's the first time it's loading. And when I tested it this morning, it would load right away, like almost instantaneously. I don't actually have the Wi-Fi connected right now, but so it's at, yeah, it's just a little over, it's not really 300, it's like 350 or something. Yeah, 369. So that's not a bad issue. The display, fortunately this is a 1280 by 720, which gives quite a bit of space even on a smaller HD. And this also can be handy if you have a small, like 800 by 600 or even 640 by 480. It can make it a little bit easier to see more, get a little more screen space, but it doesn't actually make the icons much larger necessarily, unless, yeah, it just makes the icons smaller, the font smaller. And Task Manager, HTOP, this one also, this shows how much RAM is actually being used, I guess. Like, that's not, it has a slightly different way of indicating it, because the other one is showing 2.2. But I'm thinking, actually, now that I realize, it's running the entire operating system from RAM, so it's not actually counting the image that it's loading, the squash FS or SFS. I just realized that. But this task manager shows all the RAM that's being used, including the image itself, so it's got like a whole system view. And yeah, for a 1 gigahertz dual core processor, it's actually better than the Atom processor around this time, which was released in 2011, because I read it has an out of order architecture. I mean, there are 64-bit Atoms, but this is just slightly more performance. And let's see here. So yeah, if this was actually loading from a disk or a solid state drive, it would look more like this. So technically, you only need like maybe a gigabyte to have a little overhead for a browser. But even 512 means it could probably run on, possibly could run on 512 megabyte. Well, let me reopen the browser and see. Maybe not. Yeah, you probably need a gigabyte. And it's running both cores but it's not always running at 100%, so that's a good thing. So it actually makes browsing tolerable. Like it'll only peak at 100 when it loads, but like loading something like LibreOffice also doesn't take very long. And it doesn't use very much memory. Could definitely get by on 512 megabytes. Or just barely. Might go into swap space, but if you don't have any swap, then you might go slow, a lot slower. Let me see here. Yep, quite a bit. So definitely better than I expected. I mean, it's just running on an image, but that can be yeah, it's a 1.4 gigabyte 64-bit ISO, which I downloaded, and there is also another distro that has Devuan, or without system D, or it's a derivative of Devuan called EXE, and I saw it on SourceForge, but looks like it hasn't been updated in, or no, I'm thinking of Star maybe. Yeah, Star has like a 600 megabyte ISO file, which runs on JWM and i3 window manager, but those are the only that are quite a bit smaller than this one. But again, it doesn't have all the applications out of the box, which can be in handy if you don't want to go through the whole install process. So overall, it's definitely not a bad system here. I could definitely see myself using this after Windows stops support, or even before. And YouTube was running yesterday on 360p, which was somewhat of a balance between skippy video. This does have an integrated 6250 Radeon, which is actually acceptable for offline video files. They run pretty smoothly, but when you're running it in YouTube, it's not really smooth unless it's like 240p or even 144p. So there's going to be some dropped frames if you're running even at 360, but 460p can be slightly tolerable if you're watching it for something like that you need to kind of get a sharper picture of, or pausing it, but not to really watch. But it is using a brand new kernel. It's using, Linux 6 point, etc. So you can use a modern kernel even on a 12-year-old Linux or Acer Aspire One netbook with 4 gigabytes of RAM. I wouldn't recommend running this on less than 2 gigabytes, just because it kind of gives you a little bit of extra headroom for booting it from RAM, which in a lot of ways is probably better than loading it from disk, because you kind of get some of the performance improvements there. Now, this can, be upgraded to a solid state disk. In fact, I'm not even running a disk in here, or I haven't formatted it, but it is a little bit lighter because I had a pretty heavy HDD drive, which was like 250 or 320, and I formatted it just so I could get Windows 10 running on a different drive with the license, but that's a long story. So for this one, it's just a lot better because you can just run it from solid state or SD drive, but the SD port doesn't appear to support live USB in the BIOS. I didn't find an option, but there might be another way to enable it. And there's a whole bunch of other apps here that I should test while I'm in this video, but haven't found one. Then well, that's just so 544 megabytes, 571. Yeah, overall I'm pretty impressed with this. I could see myself using it. It's for a netbook. It's much more portable, and the keys are a lot larger than some of the tiniest keys. It's not a full-size keyboard, but it's still decent because there's not much space between the keys. And actually, they almost could be the same size. Synaptic Package Manager. I don't know if it has a list of applications. Maybe it does. Yeah, I'm not sure I would want to use KDE on this, or GNOME, but there is Cinnamon if you prefer that. Yeah, quite a bit of software here. Browsing, web. Web, World Wide Web. So I had installed some other browsers like NetSurf. NetSurf does have quite a bit of options. Static site generator. Not that you really need it. I mean, you can actually use Firefox and get quite a bit of support on this, but you definitely need to install like CSS and all that other stuff to get it working. And not a whole lot others on here that I really need to use, but overall it has a lot of support, and XFF, a screensaver. I don't think they. Maybe it is pre-installed. Okay, this one. I guess there are a few. A little bit of a video preview. It's more